Today, a little bit of context on myself. Again, since I'm new here, I've been using Clojure for about 4 years. For 2 of them, I dare say I've been attempting actively to contribute to the language. 2 years ago, I was an intern with Google Summer of Code working on a static compiler for Clojure. You can go find it online as Oxcart. There's a couple of different blog posts about it. Last year, while I was an employee with Factual, Alan Malloy and I developed together an extension to the Clojure compiler that let you take advantage of Java static types for performance reasons, if you chose to do so. And in this talk, I'd like to try and explore some ideas about open source and some experiences that I've had as a user trying to contribute to the language as a project of passion, at least. So if you stop and think about the term open source, right, and the history behind it, you find that prior to, shall we say, the mid-1970s, really all the software that was written was open source, right? Computers were so hard to use and so rare that they were really only academic, and academics would share source code with each other freely because the binaries weren't compatible. You just couldn't move raw instructions from one machine to another. You had to sketch out the algorithm, you had to sketch out the source, and that was the least portable form of software. And then after that, in the 80s, you see the idea that software can become like copyrighted and patented start showing up. And then you get ESR writes his famous-ish book, The Cathedral and the Bazaar, right? Where he starts talking about his experience of building a mail fetching program with the help of users, right? Specifically calling out to this idea of his open source project as a collaborative effort in development. Then you also get the emergence of the GNU project and of the Linux kernel, obviously, as real big famous examples of collaborative development of many, many users coming together to build a piece of software rather than just being users of a prepackaged piece of software or the authors of a private piece of software, right? So I propose that in modern marketing terms, open source has become very, very tightly coupled with this idea of being openly developed as well, right? And I will, in fact, go so far as to suggest that this is not, in fact, the case. You can draw out a wide variety of different combinations of maintainership and ownership models of code together with the license and get different models of development, right? The license may nominally be open. You may nominally be able to take the code and do what you will with it, but the ownership of it, the upstream copy, the authoritative one, the one that people are going to find on Google, may not be something you can ever impact, right? This doesn't have to be the case, right? There are, in fact, open organizations. I think Peter Hitchens of ZeroMQ has done an amazing job with his C4 contract, the collective code construction contract, of describing a process by which individuals can come together to construct software and by which a maintainer can organize their community, can organize their tooling, can organize their process to encourage small individual users, to encourage small individual contributions and try to attract attention from people who may become long-term value adds. Unfortunately, and this is why my talk's a bit of a downer, that's not Clojure. If you look at the history of Clojure, especially what Rich has written back in 2011 and more recently, you will find that Clojure's ownership is very, very tightly held. A lot of people, or at least Cognitect employees, argue that this is a good thing. I personally disagree. And this will be very obvious if you take the time to go read what I've written, and from the fact that I am the sole maintainer of Jaunt, which is arguably the sole active fork of Clojure. So, grain of salt right there. But if you go look at what changes have been made and what changes have been pushed through, I think it should be very obvious to everybody that changes only occur to Clojure core as maintained by Rich and Alex and the rest of the crowd when Rich decides that they are valuable for the language itself. For instance, people have been asking for more type predicates to be added to Clojure core, just instance of checks, functions, common names we can all use, for about 4 years now. And we're only getting them because they now happen to coincide with the addition of Clojure spec, which to me is honestly pretty unctuous because they're basic terms, they're common concepts, they're something that anyone could have come along and added ages ago, and no one did. Similarly, I think that the recent changes to Clojure string, having taken about 2 years to make it through the ticket tracker, while an awesome piece of work, and I'm very grateful to Nola Stowe for it, and it's definitely useful, is another clear example of how very simple, very obviously useful code is simply excluded from the language kernel for no reason other than the fact the maintainership is loath to make any change whatsoever. So that's what I got. I'm honestly pretty mad about this, which is the reason I have a fork. So if you're mad about it too, come join me and let's actually go somewhere. And that's kind of all I got. Thanks. Questions, comments, demands of how dare you speak at this meetup? Yeah.
Yeah, what is it that allows you to do that? I don't really know what the Eclipse public license says. So, like, what are the...
So
does that apply to your code, and does that allow you to fork it?
Yeah, so the terms of the EPL state essentially that you can copy the code, you can redistribute the code, you can't remove the original license, and derivatives of this code must retain the EPL or another freer license than the EPL. Basically, you can take the EPL and you can use EPL code in a project which is not open. But if you modify EPL code, those modifications must be under the EPL, and they must be open sourced under the EPL.
Okay, so it's kind of like the GNU license.
Yes.
Okay.
It's copy left, but only on the kernel. If you bolt more stuff on, those additions are yours. But if you modify what's already there, that stays under the EPL.
Okay.
Yes?
So there was an article maybe a month or two ago, like, got a lot of the Cognitek employees' attention, and this guy was saying a lot of the same things that you were. Just curious if, like, what exactly your arguments are. Is it anything deeper than tickets being closed too slowly? Or
so for me, this is not a question of tickets being closed too slowly, although the velocity of the bug tracker is an annoyance for me. This is more a philosophical concern of the fact that I, as a user, have no meaningful hope of impacting the direction of language. Right? If you go, and this devolves into very trivial things. So if you go look at the Clojure dev mailing list, you will find a whole bunch of conversations that are terminated with either Alex or Rich sending a one-line email that says this is not up for debate. Right? Sure. And it's very clear to anyone who watches the ticket tracker and the GitHub repo that Rich and Alex iterate internally on Cognitek for about 6 months at least before they release a feature. And when they release it, they're already using it in production, and they don't care what anyone else thinks. Clojure is not an open source project. It is Rich's gift to the rest of us. And I think that's the best way to think about the license and the software and the development model. It's not open. It's Rich's grant of a really handy tool. And I find it really handy. I still use it on a day-to-day basis, right? Despite the fact that I'm up here ragging on it, I happen to really like a lot of things about it. My frustration is that I can't tweak the minor things that I really have to get under the hood for if I decided to do so, right? And I can't share those tweaks with anyone else.
Right, but he did say, I know as early as a year after Clojure was released, that he planned it to be like the benevolent dictator of Clojure. And
sure, but Guido van Rossum is a benevolent dictator, and Python is a very meaningfully open community.
Yeah, I know. I'm not trying to argue with him. I'm just like trying to bring another point. So, and I think it was never a secret that this was never going to be A, designed by committee, or B, like, his, like, people could veto him. Like, this was going to be his project. It's his project, his direction. Like, is that what you...
Sure, but the argument I'm trying to make here, and the reason I thought this was an interesting talk to give, is that's not an expectation that I realized when I joined the community as a user 4 years ago. There isn't a big red flag on the Jira that says, this is for Cognitek employees only, everyone else buzz off. Right? There's not a big red flag on the GitHub that says, open an issue here and it will be ignored. Right? Open a pull request here and we'll ask you to close it. Right?
That's because they can't put it on.
Well, I'm sure it would save Alex a lot of time and sweat if he could, but behind Tom, yeah.
So you gave a couple examples of things that have made their way into Clojure and just took a really long time.
Yep.
Is there anything that's sort of still in limbo? That, like...
I mean, I think that you can point to a bunch of things that are in Clojure and maybe don't need to be, personally. I think if you just go crawling around in the Clojure source code for a while, you'll find... No, seriously, like, this is what I've done as someone who... Like, I wrote Grimoire, conj.io, the documentation website. So I've literally gone and read every single line of Clojure core. Probably one of very few people who've had that misfortune. there's a lot of stuff in there that's vastly unused or underused, if even it's reachable at all, right? There are a lot of actual classes that are distributed in the Clojure jar that aren't documented anymore, that are support of legacy features from 1.4.1.3 that were dropped, right? And I think that, I'm sorry, I'm ranting. Question again.
We have time for one more question.
Yeah.
So something like, I mean, those contributors kind of fallen out of, use.
Yep.
Is that like a middle path you take versus working a code base and just saying, okay, we're using namespace?
So the purpose of contrib, and I think that there's a strong argument to be made that contrib was an overreach by Rich, just in terms of his time and an ability to shepherd it. Rich doesn't care. Rich Hickey doesn't care. Rich has other things he'd rather do with his time, right? And I totally respect that. Alex has other things he'd rather do with his time than read my patches. And I respect that. I have no right to claim that Rich or Alex should take time out of their days, away from their wives, away from their families, to read the stuff that I wrote for my own entertainment. The point I'm trying to stand up here and make is that you don't have to organize a community in such a way that that is a requirement. You can organize a community in such a way, and this is the point of the collective contribution contract, that you can have volunteers do that vetting. You can have automatic tools do that analysis. You can really take humans out of the process beyond a very high architectural level, and you can greatly reduce the cost of meaningfully bringing other people on board, even if you don't have time to shepherd them. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I guess I was saying, one of the beauties of Lisp is that you don't have to modify the full language. If it's just a function like instance of or something.
I mean, so if you go look at if you look at the changes I've made, and I agree with you that for most of the changes you would want to make, this is not necessary. I've tried to do stuff like change the way Clojure does class type inference, and change the way that Clojure's calling convention works, and implement a static compiler for Clojure to raw class files that don't need to dynamically load core because of the way that namespaces are initialized. So for the stuff I am personally interested in, I have no choice but to go fork the language and write my own compiler and go my own way entirely. I agree that for much of this, prior to 1.8, when they added static linking of Clojure core, you could just monkey patch the language and get away with it. That's no longer the case.
This sounds a lot like the things people were talking about with Ruby back in the 1.8, 1.9 days.
Maybe. That's older than I am.
People, yeah.
Sorry. Anyway,
Man, I thought I was old back then.
I'm just giving you grief, Tom. Last question.
Just a quick one. I don't know much about the community, but what's the Clojure script community like, and can you make contributions there?
David Nolan has done a Herculean job of being much more open and much more welcoming to other committers than I think Clojure ever was, barring pre-1.2. And I think that the Clojure script community has gained a huge amount of value from that, because you have people outside of Cognitect who are meaningfully hacking on the compiler and meaningfully adding to the standard library. Okay. Thanks so much, Wes.